Can I keep going? Okay. So I want to talk about how this model applies now to systems and groups. And I want to look at teams. And I will look at when team dynamics are challenging. And in most systems, I'm going to call a system, whatever the system is, I'm going to call it a field. So a field that we're in. The field can be a big field. It can be an individual field like myself. It can be a team. It can be a whole organization. It can be a country. It can be the world. It can be the universe, whatever the field is. And in the field, there's almost invariably a mainstream way of thinking. So when I'm working with an organization, when I'm working with a team, when I'm working with a system, invariably there's going to be a mainstream way of thinking. And the reason that occurs is because of power. So if you look at a team, for example, the leader will often dictate the direction. If you don't like it, then you get fired. Or don't like it, then we'll isolate you and put you on the side. Or people that affiliate with leadership or have influence. So there's different reasons for power. Or they're men. Or they're straight, or they're whatever, you know, they're white, or whatever the games are of that particular culture impact the centrality of the team and the mainstream nature of the team. Can anyone see that? Okay. And they create a defining role of how we operate as a team together. Now, by virtue of that structure, and there's nothing wrong with it, it's the definition of how the team is, but by virtue of that structure, all of the views, attitudes, thoughts, ideas that are outside of the mainstream become marginal. And if a team isn't working effectively and opening to the marginal, they start going underground. And they become ghost-like. Now, the reason ghost is such a good word, at least this is in a process work model, but the reason ghost becomes such a good word is you see a ghost still exists and it impacts us, but we don't see it. So they go underground, and as they go underground, they begin to present through various symptoms. There's a decrease in engagement, there's a decrease in performance, low motivation, attrition, tension, gossip, unhappiness, and you get fragmentations that happen, and the team doesn't work well together. Have you ever seen that in teams? Okay. And that basically occurs for me because of this particular pattern. So as a consultant, what I'm looking for is invariably, because the ghosts are invisible, they don't show themselves. So often when I'm working with a team, I'll interview, in fact, almost every team I work with now, I want to interview a lot of the members of the team to find out what's going on. What are the symptoms? And as much as I can unpack, what are the ghosts or marginal roles that are disallowed and disavowed in that system? Because you see, if I can get to those, if I can get the disavowed roles, I have an opportunity of bringing them back. If I bring them back, some of the symptoms I'm hopeful will be decrease. But the challenge often happens, this is very good for consultants, by the way. So if you want to, for consultants, this is our bread and butter, because this is when we get called in, when there's all sorts of problems in the team. So I'm interested in the problem. Can you see I'm going back to the disturbance? Remember the idea of the goats going into the disturbances? I want to go into the disturbance to find out what's in the disturbance, because within the very disturbance itself is often the solutions and the ideas that we're looking for. Within the very disturbance itself is all of the reasons why that's underground and what's going on in the system that needs to emerge. And as I mentioned, a lot of this occurs due to rank and power. Now, rank, definition of rank by Mendel, the founder of process work, is that one's relative power position in any given system or social interpersonal context. And power comes from many, many things. It's not just positional power, although positional power in organizations is important. It's affiliative power. I know the CEO, I know the boss. My dad owns the company. Doesn't matter what my role is. It can be It can be psychological power. Some people are really strong in teams irrespective of role. Have you noticed? They just get strong and forceful. It can be a social power that's either education or an ism that's present, some form of that's identified or supported more, especially when you get into, for example, gender. Typically you get into more technology and certain skill-based organizations, and there's less and less women in the organization, etc. So power can come from many, many different contexts. A couple of keys to power, which I didn't write down. Can I share them briefly with you? A couple of keys to power. First thing is, there's nothing wrong with power. There's a lot wrong with how it's used. You see, often when we have power, people think, well, if I have power, I should give my power up so I don't misuse it. But there's a gap in thinking there for me. For me, the idea is if I have power, the question is not whether I can give it up or not. Invariably, it's hard to give up. Much easier is to think, how can I use my power well? So that's the question I often ask when folks have power. If you want to know how you're using your power, all you need to do is ask those people around you who will be impacted by your use of power. Because you see, if I have power, I'm really comfortable. Everything is great on this team, isn't it? What's the problem? We're all doing great. If you want to speak, you speak, right? Yeah. Wrong. So what happens typically is if I have power by virtue of the comfort, I'm not conscious of the difficulty in other people who might not be able to emerge in their power. And this awareness of executives and leaders and all of us is really, really important. I mean, quite recently I was talking to a team, and there was a vice president on an executive team, and there was a vice president in this team, and she just lost her key person. Now they are friends. She lost them, they've gone to another organization. I said to them, did you do an exit interview of this person? They said, no. I said, can I do one? She said, will you try and set up? I asked her. She said, sure, of course. I spoke to her, and I got all sorts of gold for the organization from the disturbance. What was incredibly surprising is one of her best friends, who works and collaborated with her for almost 10 years, could not tell her what was really going on, why she needed to leave. Isn't that far out? You think, but she's my friend. We talk about everything. We go on vacation together. But she couldn't talk about certain things, and that's because of the unconsciousness of power and the unconsciousness of the lack of awareness of the difficulty people will have by virtue of the power that we hold. So power is a huge mechanism. So the key is, if we want to know about our power, it's not good to think about ourselves. Ask those people who might be impacted by it. They will know more about our power than we do. You can't change power. The key to power is to actually use it well. One of the most devastating impacts of power when you don't have power is what we do to ourselves through a process that I call internal marginalization. So once you're marginalized externally by the poor use of power, you internalize those values, and you begin to feel weak about yourself. And I'll never forget, there was a teacher that I had. He was a very powerful guy. Very powerful. He'd be in groups, and he has a lot of personal power. And suddenly he was with his teacher, and he would like melt. And he would be this shivering kind of guy. And I'd say, who's this person? It was so weird to see that in all contexts except that one. And he suddenly lost all his power. So the key is what was going on inside him that had placed his power at that moment in the other person. Can you see that? So we place, by virtue of all the correct and incorrect allocations of power, we place our power in others and disavow our power in ourselves. So a lot of our work is to reclaim the power we have in ourselves. Just one last piece about power. Often when I'll go into teams and I work with the team members, that a difficult team will often complain about their leader. So if I think about it from a personal development piece, the person who's disturbing us is the leader. And this is a little complex in thinking, but I'll just share it briefly. For me, what that means is that there's a need for leadership inside ourselves that isn't yet emerging. You see, it's much easier to try and work on changing the other person than work on changing ourselves. I tried that with my ex-wife, okay? How many of us haven't tried that on our partners? You go home and how many of us are still not working on our partners? You know, just slowly and subtly, but at least I don't know if anyone else does it, but I still have that habit every now and then to try and just get a little change here and there. It doesn't work. Anyone else notice? I've spent 40 years doing it. And I'm still learning. It doesn't really work. What really works is when we work on ourselves. Suddenly I work on myself and things change. I think, wow, how did that happen? So the projection onto the leader is a placement of our power onto the other that's marginalized inside us. And the claiming of our own power is often what's needed many times in those people in the organization, especially when I'm working with them. When I'm working with the leader, of course, they need to be aware of their power too. So both sides. Okay, so the internal marginalization that can happen is quite devastating in terms of power. Okay, so let's go back to that model again. Whoops, back to effective teams again. Let's go back to the model again. So, what I like to do in terms of my work with groups is have the mainstream role again and get this ghost role to re-emerge. And this is a complex process. And the reason I say bringing the ghost role out is complex is that when you bring a role out, it's underground for good reason. So it's underground because if it were to come out, it might get into trouble. So if you've been disavowed, criticized, judged, put down, or lost a job because of your view, you don't want to bring that view out again. Can everyone see that? So it goes underground, even if it's useful. So you can imagine at Kodak, going back to Kodak, you can imagine that a technology guy comes along with an idea, it gets pushed down, it goes underground, it gets lost. So a lot of wisdom gets lost because it goes underground. So getting this to come out requires a certain safety. Now the superficial level for me of safety says, do we all agree that we're going to support each other in the room? No repercussions. And that's a nice idea, and it's a good idea. It doesn't work all that well. Has anyone else noticed? Safety doesn't occur because of a request. Safety occurs because of the interactions in the room that create a safe environment. So for me, the next level that occurs is the question, and this is why I say it's a two-step process to bring this ghost out. The first step in the process is to create enough safety for the ghosts to come out. So I remember working with a CEO, and I was called in to work with the CEO because he used to lose his temper. Not the only CEO I've worked with. I'm sure many of us have had CEOs that have lost their tempers. But anyway, in this situation, the CEO was losing their temper and getting angry. And I was asked to come in and work with the team and the CEO on this. So I asked all the team members, have you spoken to the CEO about the loss of their temper? They said no. So the CEO doesn't even realize the impact. But everyone is too scared to speak to them about this. So can you see there's a ghost in the room? And they're too afraid to bring it out. What are they afraid of? If I bring it out, the CEO won't like me and I'll lose either influence or I'll lose my job. These are vice presidents of an organization, I think it was maybe 25,000 people. Big organization. So now I'm working, I see there's a challenge there. So how do we bring this out for the team? Now if I do all the work, which I actually did a lot of it in that situation, they don't grow. Their job is to bring it out. But there needs to be enough safety to be able to talk. So the first discussion that we have in the group and with me privately with the CEO is to give feedback and say, look, the team has feedback for you. I think it's really important you pick it up. I can give you a sense of what the feedback's going to be. It's about your temper, etc., etc., etc. Are you open to the feedback? Because if you're not, we can't change the team. Can everyone see that? I'm bringing out the feedback. I'm bringing out the ghosts. Now, if I don't work with him before, and I don't want to set him up and suddenly he's getting feedback in the group and he's upset about that, but he needs to be open prior to that. Now, as I set this up with the CEO and they agree to it, as we come in the room, he needs to then create an environment with me, which is the second step, where the ghosts can emerge back and be able to give the feedback that they need to. Everyone got that? Everyone see that? Okay. As that occurs, something very special occurs. As this role begins to emerge and become less ghost-like, there's an interaction that occurs. There's an interaction between that, the mainstream, and the emerging role. Now, it's not that the emerging roles are right. It's that the emerging roles have information which without it, we cannot make the best possible decisions. In other words, diversity enriches. A diverse group, a group that has different opinions, is actually a richer group. It's not a limiting group. If everyone thinks the same, you're actually limited by the sameness of thought. When you get diverse opinions and you can use them constructively to come to the best possible solution, you have a diverse and dynamic situation that occurs. So conflict in itself is not bad. It's the inability to work with it that becomes the problem. Conflict or differences enrich. So the opportunity to bring out all of those roles and really work with them skillfully is very, very important. When that happens, I've seen over and over again high engagement, improved performance, greater motivation, increased diversity, and greater cultural cohesion. Okay, now I'd like Trump to listen to this presentation. What happens finally with that is that the system grows. But it requires a courage. The same as going over an edge requires a courage. This requires a courage. It requires a courage to be prepared to hear those voices that might in their very nature disturb the system that we're working with. Okay, that's my teamwork. You know, I know we're going to be getting tired. It's a lot of information to give you. So there's going over the edge. Now, unfortunately, it's gender specific, that one. I'd like to have a slide where the females are leading, but that's the one we got at the moment, so my apologies. But I thought it's a fun slide nonetheless. Going over the edge. Okay, folks, any questions?